The default notice was taped to my mother's front door with blue painter's tape, and I knew that tape. It was the same roll my brother kept in the bed of his truck for trim work, which meant he had stood exactly where I was standing, read exactly what I was reading, and walked away and left it there for somebody else to find. My name is Delia. I'm 36 years old. I'm a deputy U.S. Marshal assigned to a fugitive task force out of Great Falls, Montana, which is about 1,600 miles from that porch, and, according to my family, roughly the distance a daughter travels when she stops caring. For 3 years I had wired $1,800 home on the first of every month. Mortgage, light bill, gas, groceries with a cushion built in so my mother would never have to choose between her heart medication and a box fan in a Memphis August. 36 transfers, not one missed. Not the month I got promoted, not the month I spent 9 days in a motel outside Bismarck working a warrant sweep and eating gas station eggs over the hood of a Tahoe. The paper on the door said the loan was 7 payments behind, and the property was being referred for foreclosure proceedings. And for 2 of those 3 years, my brother had been telling everyone at every cookout, every church supper, every hospital waiting room, that he was the one who stayed, and I was the one who left. Here's what he never counted on. A wire transfer isn't a favor, it's a record. Every dollar I sent left behind a timestamp, a confirmation number, and a receiving account with his name on it. Before I tell you what I set down on the table at that family reunion, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I always wonder how far a story like this travels. Welcome back to Karma's Keeper, where the ones they call absent are usually the ones holding the paperwork. If you've ever sent money home and watched your love get measured by how often you showed up, instead of how much you carried, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. But let me take you back 11 years. To the summer I left Memphis with a duffel bag, a bus ticket, and a badge I hadn't earned yet. I grew up off Wilbourn Cove, in a 2-bedroom brick house with a carport my father never finished screening in before he died. That was 1998. I was 8. My brother was 13. After the funeral, my mother worked the industrial laundry on Getwell for 6 years, then moved to a school cafeteria job because the hours matched our school day, and because the laundry heat had started giving her headaches that lasted into the weekend. I remember the smell of that kitchen more than I remember most things about being a kid. Bleach and steam in the first years. Then, later, the school lunch smell she carried home in her hair, canned corn and industrial soap, and something faintly sweet underneath. My grandmother Ruby lived 4 blocks over and functionally ran our household from a card table in her own kitchen. She had a tea tin on the windowsill, an old Louisiane tin with a faded lemon printed on the lid, the yellow worn down to almost nothing on one side, where her thumb had rubbed it for 20 years. That tin held what she called the light money, cash for the electric bill, folded in half, and underneath the cash, receipts. Every single one. Ruby had a rule, and she said it the way other grandmothers say grace. Anything you pay for, you keep the paper. I was 15 the first time I understood what she meant. I was working the drive-thru at a Sonic on Elvis Presley Boulevard, and a shut-off notice came for the water. Not a warning, a notice, with a date on it, 4 days out. My mother put it under the sugar canister where she put things she intended to handle later, which was the same place she'd put the last 3. I took my paycheck to the MLJLBU Payment Center on a Tuesday after school and paid $142 in cash. When I got home, my mother was sitting at the table with her shoes off and her feet up on the other chair, and she looked at the stamped receipt in my hand for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that, baby," she said. "I know." That was the whole conversation, but that evening, Ruby took the receipt out of my hand, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, and put it in the tin under the lemon. She didn't explain why. She just did it the way you'd put a tool back in the right drawer. My brother was 17 that year and had a job at a tire shop that he quit in March and didn't replace until August. Nobody put a notice under the sugar canister for him. Nobody expected him to see it. That was the arrangement in our family, and I want to be precise about it, because I don't think it was cruelty. It was just a system that had grown up around us like kudzu. My brother was the one people were glad to see. He had our father's laugh and a way of walking into a room like he'd been invited twice. My mother lit up when he came through the door. Every time. 11 years old, 31 years old. It didn't matter. I was the one people were glad to have. There's a difference, and it takes about 2 decades to feel the shape of it. I handled things. I filled out the FAFSA at the kitchen table with my mother's W-2 and a calculator with a cracked screen. I called the hospital billing department when my grandmother had her gallbladder out and negotiated the balance down to something payable. I was 14 when I learned to say the sentence, "I'm calling about an account," in a voice that made adults on the phone stop talking to me like a child. At 22, I got hired as a detention officer at the county. At 25, I passed the federal application process, and I went to Glencoe, Georgia, for 17 and a half weeks of training that broke my body down and rebuilt it. I graduated 11th in my class. I have a photograph of that day, and I am the only person in it who isn't related to somebody else in it. That's not self-pity, that's just the record. And once the badge came, my competence stopped being a private thing and became a family resource. In 2017, my brother caught a suspended license charge in Shelby County, and my mother called me at 9 at night, Montana time, and asked me to make a call for him. I explained, twice, that a federal deputy in another state has exactly as much influence over a Tennessee traffic docket as a plumber does. She heard the first sentence and not the second. "You know people," she said. "Not those people." There was a pause, and then she said, "Well, I just thought." And she said goodbye, in the voice she used when I had disappointed her, and I sat on the edge of a bed in a rented apartment, 1,600 miles away, feeling like I'd failed a test I hadn't been told about. 2 weeks later, I paid the fine. Nobody asked me to. Nobody mentioned it afterward either. That's how it worked. What I could do was assumed. What I couldn't do was noticed. I told my family 6 weeks before I left. We were in that same kitchen, and I laid it out plainly. The academy, the assignment, the pay, the fact that I'd be gone at least 4 years before I could request a transfer closer to home. My brother leaned back against the counter with a plate in his hand. "So you're leaving," he said. "I'm going to work." That's what I said. My mother didn't say anything for a while. Then she told me that Memphis had raised me, and she said it kindly, and she meant it kindly, and I have spent 11 years understanding that a kind sentence can still be a bill. Ruby died in 2019. She left me the tin, empty, except for a rubber band and one receipt from a hardware store on Lamar dated the month before, for a doorknob she'd bought and never installed. I kept it on a shelf in my apartment in Great Falls, next to a coffee mug from a service that no longer exists. And over the next several years, without ever consciously deciding to, I started putting things in it. Here's what my job actually is, so the rest of this makes sense. I work fugitive apprehension. That means I spend most of my life building files on people who do not want to be found. Last known address, vehicle registration, utility hookups. Who signed for the storage unit? Who's paying the phone bill? You learn something doing that work for a decade, and it's not what people assume. It isn't that everybody lies. It's that almost nobody can afford the paperwork their lie requires. The story falls apart at the receipts. Always. Somebody's cousin swears he hasn't seen him in a year, and then there's a $34 charge at a marathon station 6 blocks from her house at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The mouth says one thing, the paper says another. I have never once seen the paper lose. I mention this because my family has never fully understood what I do. To them, I work for the government. To my brother, specifically, I carry a gun and act like it's something. Now, if you've ever been the child who was mature enough to be handed the bills but never grown enough to be given a say, the one who got handed responsibility and called distant for the way you carried it, drop a comment. Just one word. I want to know I'm not the only one who understands what it feels like to be the family's most reliable person and its least invited one. My mother had her first stroke in October of 2022. It was a small one, in the technical sense doctors use, which is a word that only means something if you're not the one lying in the bed. She lost some strength on her left side. Her speech came back inside of a week except for a hesitation before certain nouns, a half-second pause where the word used to be. I flew in that same night. I stayed 11 days. I sat with the discharge planner and wrote down every medication, every dosage, every follow-up. I built a file, because that's what I know how to do with fear. And on day 9, in the hospital cafeteria, my brother made me an offer. He'd put on weight and lost some hair since I'd seen him last, and he had a way of holding a styrofoam cup with both hands that made him look younger than 41. He said he'd been thinking about it. He'd give up his apartment in Bartlett. He'd move back into his old room. He'd be there overnight, every night, so she wouldn't be alone if it happened again. But I can't do it and work full-time, he said. That's just the math. I said that was fair. Because it was. We built the arrangement right there over 2 trays of hospital chicken. I'd cover the mortgage, the utilities, and a grocery amount every month. He'd be the body in the house. He'd handle the local end, walk the payments where they needed to go, take her to Methodist South for her follow-ups, pick up her prescriptions. I want to say clearly that I thought this was a good deal. I wasn't buying my way out of anything. I was buying the only thing I couldn't provide from Montana, which was proximity. He had it. I didn't. That's not a scam. That's a family dividing labor. Then he said one more thing, and I heard it, and I did not act on it. Send it to me, not to Mama. She still won't do anything online, and if it sits in her account, she'll give it to the church. That's a reasonable sentence. That's the kind of sentence that has a whole rational architecture behind it. It's also, in my professional experience, exactly the shape of the sentence people say right before they establish sole control of an income stream. I noticed it. I remember noticing it. And then I set it down, because the alternative was to say out loud in a hospital cafeteria that I didn't trust my only brother with my mother's light bill. My partner on the task force is a deputy named Owen Kirkwood, 61 years old, 29 years in, drinks his coffee out of a green thermos that he has never once washed in front of me. I told him about the arrangement on a long drive back from a service in Havre. He listened to the whole thing. Then he said, "Who's on the loan?" "My mother." "Who's your name on?" "Nothing." Kirk drove about a mile before he answered. "Then you're not a party to it. You're just a source of funds." I told him it was family, not a case. "Sure," he said. And he let it go, because that's what a good partner does. He puts the flag in the ground where you can find it later. I also want to be honest about why I said yes so fast, because I've thought about it a lot since, including with a therapist I started seeing in 2023, named Dr. Ansel, who has an office with a window that looks at a parking lot and a habit of waiting me out. I said yes because I wanted to buy my way back in. 11 years of Christmases where I was the one on speakerphone. 11 years of being described as the one who left. And here was a thing I could do that nobody else could do, and I thought, this is the part I'm not proud of. I thought if I carried the whole thing quietly, one day somebody would notice out loud. That was the arrangement. First transfer went out November 1st, 2022. The first 18 months, I have no complaints about, because I had no information. My mother sounded better on the phone. She started walking the block again. My brother sent me photographs sometimes. Her sitting on the carport steps, a repaired gutter, a new smoke detector. I paid for all of it, and I was glad to. The first thing that didn't sit right was a Sunday call in the spring of 2024. She was telling me about a neighbor's grandson, and then in the middle of it she said, "The man came about the house again." I asked what man. There was that half-second pause where the noun used to be, and then she said, "For the yard, I think. Curtis handled it." I asked my brother about it that night. He said the city had sent somebody about the tall grass in the side lot, and he'd already cut it. He was irritated that I'd asked. He said it in a specific way, not angry, just tired, the way you'd talk about a coworker who checks your work. "You send the money, I do the living," he said. "That's the deal." Then July came, and my Aunt Verna called me, which she had not done in 3 years. Verna is my father's older sister, and the closest thing our family has to a public address system. She called to tell me about the reunion, second Saturday in September, The pavilion at the park off Rains, same as always. And she wanted to know if I was going to make it this year. Then she said, "You should come see your mama while she's still your mama." I've replayed that sentence more times than is healthy. It wasn't cruel. My aunt doesn't do cruel. She does concerned, which is a heavier caliber. I put in for 11 days of leave the next morning. I landed in Memphis on the Thursday before that second Saturday, rented a gray Malibu at the airport, and drove out to the house with the windows down, because September in Tennessee smells like cut grass and hot asphalt, and something green rotting pleasantly underneath. Nobody was home. My brother's truck wasn't in the carport, which I noticed, and there was a base boat on a trailer parked in the side lot where the tall grass had supposedly been the problem, which I noticed harder. And the notice was on the door. I stood on that porch for probably 90 seconds and read it 4 times. Not because it was complicated, because I was trying to find the version of it that meant something else. 7 payments behind, referred for foreclosure proceedings, a phone number for the servicer's loss mitigation department, and a case reference number in bold. I didn't call my brother. I didn't go inside. I got back in the rental car, drove to a Chick-fil-A parking lot on Winchester because it had reliable service, and I started working the file. That's the only way I know how to describe what happened next. Something in me went from daughter to deputy in the space of a parking lot, and I have never been so grateful for a skill in my life. First call, the servicer. 40 minutes on hold. They wouldn't talk to me. I'm not on the loan, which Kirk had told me 18 months before in a car outside Havre. But the automated system will give you the last payment date if you have the loan number, and the loan number was printed on the notice taped to the door with my brother's painter's tape. Last payment received. February. It was September. 2nd. The utility. Same wall, different bricks. But the gas account had a past due balance that the automated line was willing to read out loud to anyone with a keypad, and it was $612. 3rd, I drove to the credit union branch in Fraser and printed my own outgoing transfer history for 36 months. 12 pages. And this is the part that I think about most, because printing your own record is not detective work. It's just paper you already owned. 4th, I went to see the bank. The servicer had a local walk-in office in a strip mall, with a nail salon on one side and a vacant storefront on the other. The woman at the desk was named Ruth Ann Petrie, mid-60s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, a cardigan in a building that was already too cold. She could not give me account details. She told me so twice, kindly. But she could look at what I put in front of her. And I put 12 pages in front of her. She read for a while. She turned pages. She stopped once, went back 1 page, and read something again. Then Ruth Ann took her glasses off, let them fall on the beaded chain, and said, "Honey, is your mother able to come in here herself?" She didn't tell me anything. She told me everything. That afternoon I brought my mother in. She signed a third-party authorization, and Ruth Ann printed a payment history, and I sat in a plastic chair in a strip mall in Memphis and read the whole architecture of it. Every payment that had been made late. Every single one. Some by 9 days, some by 26. Which meant late fees, which meant the amount owed kept climbing, while the amount I sent stayed exactly the same. And then in March, they simply stopped. 7 months of nothing, against a wire that went out on the first of every one of those months. I did the arithmetic on the back of a deposit slip. 3 years, 36 transfers, $64,800, and my mother's house was 7 payments from the courthouse steps. I want to tell you I felt rage. I didn't. What I felt was the specific cold that comes over me at about 4 in the morning on a warrant service, when the planning is over and the front door is 30 feet away and there is nothing left to decide. Steady, narrow, quiet. I filed that number the way I file every operational detail, not to carry it around, but to have it ready. My mother was looking at me from the next chair. She'd understood about half of it, and the half she understood was the half that mattered. "Don't make it ugly at the reunion," she said. "Please, Delia." I said I wouldn't raise my voice. That was a promise I could keep, and did keep. If you've ever held a piece of paper that confirmed something you'd been talking yourself out of, believing for a year, stay with me. Subscribe, because you'll want to see how this lands. But tell me this, would you have driven straight to his job and handled it privately that same afternoon? Or would you have waited for the room? I've heard good arguments both ways, and I still don't know that I chose right. What I did next, I planned in the time it takes to drive from Fraser to a Kinko's on Poplar. I spent the next 36 hours building 2 columns. The left column was the wire ledger, date sent, amount, confirmation number, receiving account, receiving name. 36 rows. I printed it on a single oversized sheet so it couldn't be shuffled, argued with page by page, or set aside as a lot of paperwork. The right column was the servicer's payment history. Same date range, same 36 months. Dates received, amounts applied, late fees assessed, and then a run of empty rows where 7 payments should have been. I didn't write a word of commentary on either page, no highlighting, no arrows. I have testified in federal court enough times to know that the least persuasive thing you can do with a strong document is decorate it. Then I got Ruby's tin out of my suitcase, because I had brought it, and I'd have a hard time telling you why. The reunion was the second Saturday, at the pavilion, starting at noon. By 1 o'clock there were about 40 of us. Aunt Verna had 2 folding tables of food, and a third table just for desserts. Somebody's Bluetooth speaker was working through Al Green. It was 91 degrees, and the pavilion fans pushed the heat around without reducing it. My mother sat in the shade in a green folding chair with a plate she wasn't eating from. I got the treatment for about an hour. That's what I'd call it. Not hostility. Nothing you could point at. She hugged me and told the 3 women near her, not me, that it was so good she could get away. A cousin asked if Montana had black people in it, and laughed at his own joke. Somebody else said it must be nice, not having to deal with all this day to day. The chorus doesn't attack, it establishes. And my brother worked the pavilion like a man at his own retirement party, hand on shoulders, plate in hand. Every few minutes, that laugh. Around 2 o'clock, he tapped a plastic fork against a 2-liter bottle until it got quiet enough, and he stood up in the middle of the pavilion with a coffee can in his hand. I want to be exact here, because I've had 2 years to be exact. He said, "Y'all know Mama's been struggling. I've been in that house every night for 3 years, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend it hasn't cost me. We're behind on the mortgage. It's real. So I'm passing this, and whatever anybody can do, it helps." Then he looked up, over the tables, directly at me, and he smiled, and he said it lightly, the way you'd tease somebody you love. And I'm just saying, it's easy to send a card at Christmas. Some of us been here. 40 people, Al Green, the fans. I have been in rooms where the temperature changes. This was that. I didn't stand up right away. I finished swallowing what was in my mouth, because I've watched enough interviews to know what it looks like when somebody answers too fast, and I set my cup down on the table, and I got up. The silence lasted about 7 seconds, and it was the loudest thing at that park. I walked to the dessert table, because it was the only one with clear space, and I set down Ruby's tin. The lid came off with the sound it has always made. I took out the 2 sheets I'd folded inside it, and I unfolded them, and I laid them side by side on the table with 2 borrowed serving spoons holding the corners down against the fan. Then I said one thing, and I said it at a normal volume, the volume you'd use to ask somebody to pass the salt. "This is what I sent. This is what the bank got. Can you walk me through the difference?" My brother did not move for a moment. He was still holding the coffee can. Then he laughed, 1 syllable, out of rhythm, and said, "What is this?" 36 wires, their payment history, same dates. You brought paperwork to a reunion. You asked the family for money for a mortgage I've been paying for 3 years, I said. I'm giving them something to look at before they open their wallets. Here is what actually broke him, and it wasn't me. Nobody in that pavilion had to take my side. They just had to look down. And a family reunion is one of the only environments on Earth where 40 people will absolutely look down at a piece of paper on a dessert table. My cousin Renard looked first. then his wife, then two of my mother's church friends, one of whom put her glasses on, then my aunt, who had to walk around the table to see it right side up. And the room did the thing I have watched rooms do 100 times. It went from social to procedural. Somebody said, out loud, "March." "It says March here, Curtis." My brother's face didn't drain of color. It did something worse. It kept the smile for one extra second after his eyes had already given up on it. And that gap, that half second of face without anything behind it, that's the moment I'll remember when I'm 80. Then he came apart in stages, and each stage was smaller than the one before it. First, it was complicated. There were repairs, the roof, the water heater. I asked which month the roof was, and said I'd be glad to look at the invoice. Second, I didn't know what it was like. I'd been gone. I had no idea what it took. I said that was true, and that it was exactly why I'd sent what I sent. Third, and this is the one that hurt, because it was aimed at the only person there who couldn't defend herself. He turned to our mother and said, "Mama, tell her. Tell her what I do around here." The pavilion went so quiet that you could hear the ice settle in the cooler. My mother looked at her plate. She didn't say anything. She didn't say anything for a long time. And Verna, who had spent 3 years telling this county that I'd left. Verna reached over and quietly took the coffee can out of my brother's hand and set it on the ground behind her chair. She didn't look at anybody when she did it. That was the closest thing to a verdict that afternoon produced. The other thing I noticed, and I noticed it because I notice things, the woman who'd been hired to keep the food out, a caterer named Ola Bird in a black apron with a towel over her shoulder, had stopped refilling the sweet tea. She stood at the end of the table with the pitcher in both hands, and when I looked at her, she gave me the smallest nod I have ever received and went back to work. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left that needed saying, and the 2 pages on the dessert table were doing more than I could have. I picked up the tin. "I left the papers where they were," I said. "Y'all enjoy the food," and I walked out to the gray rental car in the heat, with the Bluetooth speaker still playing to nobody. If you have ever stood in a room where 40 people went quiet, and the silence itself became the admission that nobody was willing to say out loud, hit subscribe. You'll want to hear what happened next, because the afternoon wasn't the hard part. I drove to a Comfort Inn on Elvis Presley and sat in the parking lot with the engine running and the air conditioning on for about 20 minutes. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel settled. I felt the way you feel after a long service goes clean. Winded. A little sick. Aware that a thing you'd been carrying in your chest for months has been set down and your arms don't know what to do now. Then I got out the tin and put the receipt for the parking at the airport in it, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and that made me laugh. And then it didn't. Here's what happened over the next 11 weeks. The loan got reinstated. It cost more than the arrears, because it always does. The fees, the attorney referral charge the servicer had already incurred. Ruth Ann walked us through the reinstatement quote, line by line with her glasses on the chain, and I'm sure there are foreclosure attorneys watching this who could explain the mechanics of that better than I can. My mother signed a limited authorization so I could speak to them directly, permanently. Nothing goes to an individual anymore. It goes to the servicer, the utility, and a grocery card, and I get the confirmations myself. My brother moved out in November, not because anybody made him. Word travels through 40 people faster than through any system I've ever worked with, and the side work he'd been getting from church connections stopped coming in. He's in South Haven now. I still don't know whether he ever told his wife the truth about where those transfers went, or whether she'd already worked it out and had her own reasons for not saying so. I've thought about it. I probably always will. The base boat is gone. I didn't ask. 3 days after the reunion, I got a text from his daughter, my niece, 22, in her second year at a community college, and the only person in that pavilion who had walked over to look at the pages twice. It said, "I'm not mad at you." I looked at the dates. I knew about the truck in April and I didn't say nothing to nobody. I'm sorry. I read it 4 times in a motel parking lot. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't hers to be sorry for, and pretending otherwise would have made her carry it. I told her that being 22 and outnumbered is not the same as being complicit, and that I'd like to hear from her, and that if she ever wants to talk about federal service, I'll take that call any hour. She texts me most Sundays now. If this story reached something in you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, and tell me, was there a moment when you realized the help you were giving your family had quietly turned into a payment plan for somebody else's comfort? Tell me what tipped you off. I read every one of them. In December, I sent my brother one email. Not a lecture. I don't have it in me, and it wouldn't have landed. I offered him two things: the name of a nonprofit credit counselor on Union that Ruth Ann recommended, and a written repayment schedule at whatever number he could actually manage. $50 a month, $100. It genuinely did not matter to me. I told him if he signed it and made 3 payments, I'd sit down with him in a room and hear him out about the 3 years, and I meant that. I also told him there is no version of the future where money leaves my hands and goes into his. He hasn't answered. That's been almost 2 years now. My mother sees him. He calls her on Sundays, and I've never once asked her to choose, and I never will, and I hope you hear that as the boundary it is, rather than the coldness it isn't. Here's what 11 years of building files on people taught me, and it took my own family for me to apply it to myself. The people who exploit you are almost never running an elaborate scheme. They're running the simplest one there is. They're counting on you loving them too much to look. Not too weak, not too foolish, too loving. And the whole thing holds together right up until somebody quietly does the arithmetic in a strip mall on a Thursday. That's my story. The tin sits on the shelf in Great Falls with a rubber band and a hardware store receipt from 2019, and about 100 pieces of paper Ruby never saw. I still don't put anything in it that I don't intend to keep. And now I want to ask you something. Knowing what he said in front of 40 people, would you have laid those 2 pages on that dessert table in the middle of the reunion? Or would you have folded them back into your bag, taken your mother home, and handled it privately in a kitchen where nobody else could watch? If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me one word: paper. Because that's what I want every person watching this to understand. Your family will always be able to argue with your version of events, but nobody has ever successfully argued with a date, an amount, and a confirmation number. This story is fictional, created for dramatic entertainment, education, and reflection. But the lesson underneath it is real. Love people generously, help them fully, and keep the paper anyway, not because you expect to need it, but because the day you do, it will be the only thing in the room that never once changed its story.